Hello storytellers, I'm writer and artist Lex Lank, and this is Creator's Cut, where I chronicle my continuing creative journey. In today's episode, I will be talking about some of the things I learned in 2025 and welcoming in 2026. The end of the year is one of my favorite times of year, that time between Christmas and New Year's. I love sitting down and actually writing out what I've been through the year and what accomplishments I've made and what challenges I've had, and kind of just looking at where do I want to go next and what I'm excited about for next year. I do this every year, and I have since I was, I think, about 18. Shortly before I started self-publishing, I kind of made it a tradition to sit down at the end of the year and write out all of these things. So I always look forward to it. This year's no different. I actually recently sat down and wrote out all of these things, went through different questions that I go through every year. And when I do that, I actually look back at my answers from the previous year. And so this year I sat down and looked at my questions and answers from 2024, the end of 2024 in December. And I do this questionnaire about the same time every year. I think, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 days before New Year's Eve. And so I'm always surprised by what I end up seeing and, saying, not just for the current year, but for the previous year when I'm looking back. But I think this year it was a little more of a surprise than normal. I pulled out my notebook that I have used for several years now and actually went over what I said in 2024. And I was like, I'm reading through it, and I don't know, it was just very strange to look at how different my mindset was. I texted my best friend and I was like, this is really strange. Like who wrote this? I almost couldn't, recognize what I had written. I know I had written it, and when I read over it, of course it made sense. I was like, oh yes, I remember, feeling that way and going through that. And I remember that being, a big deal, important. But it was kind of bizarre because I almost felt like somebody else had written it. Like I hadn't written it, even though I knew that I had. And so that was an interesting experience. But I sat there going through my notes from last year and then my notes from this year and kind of comparing the two. I asked myself the same questions. The end of last year, I actually found in, I believe it was Reader's Digest magazine, they had a list of 4 questions to ask yourself. And, now that the year was over or was coming to a close, and it was all writing related, of course, but just things to ask yourself of, how have I done this year? What were the things that, not just that I accomplished, but, what was the biggest challenge? What was surprising, that kind of thing. And what am I excited for next year? But what am I also apprehensive about? And what can I do to, work better next year? And I'll actually read off those questions at the end of the video if you want to try them out for yourself, whether it's writing related or not. They're pretty adaptable for everything. But I went over these same questions and wrote them out for, my answers for this year and just compared them. And it was just such a stark contrast. I was very surprised at how stark of a contrast, but I sat there thinking, what is the biggest difference, or the biggest difference in my mindset to really, get from point A to point B? What made the biggest difference this year for my mind to have changed so much, for my outlook to have changed so much? And when I started comparing the two and thinking about that, I came to the conclusion that, not only have I had kind of a difficult year, I will be honest and say this is probably one of the most difficult years I've had for a while, at least, if not in general. It might just be one of my most difficult years overall. That's not to say this necessarily been horrible or anything. There have been quite a few challenges, both personally and with family and medically, but there have been good things too, of course. There's always good things. That's one of the reasons why I like looking back over my year and thinking through what I've been through, and what challenges, but also what triumphs too, because there's always more triumphs than we think there are. And sometimes there's more challenges than we think there are too. And it's not until we really start looking back and really thinking about what we've been through and just how full the year has really been, that we actually come to realize, how many things we've been through. And so that's one of the reasons why I like writing this down. But where was I going with that? I'm sorry. There's been so much I had to think of for this video, so I'm bound to go off on tangents. I'm just going to warn you right now. But I will try my best to get back to the main points of topic, which was what made my mindset change. So not only did I have a lot of challenges this year, because it has been such a difficult year, one of my most difficult, but I think professionally I had to swallow some hard truths in some ways, and just I had to change my mindset about work. I'll call it professional creativity. That was really, I think, the biggest thing was coming to the conclusion that I had published before, and I have done, creative things professionally before, but I think I was stuck in a bit of a naive mindset, if you want to put it that way, maybe just idealistic. Last year, the end of last year was the end of the year that I really started liking writing again, and I finished that main project. I think in my previous video I talked about it. We'll call it my vampire project. I finished that project, and I started really liking writing again. I was feeling very comfortable with writing again. I finally felt like, a real writer. I was very excited. It was definitely the end point of my, writing depression that I had been going through for quite some time. That was the very, very end point of that. And I was finally in a good place. So I think at the end of last year, I really had a lot of idealistic thoughts, which are not necessarily bad. I think I had to get to that point in order to feel free to be more creative again and to pursue writing from a happy place, if you will, instead of the negative space I was in before. But it was very much thinking, how do I put this? I've had a hard time thinking of how to put all of these things. So thank you for being patient with me. But yeah, I think I was in the mindset of, oh, I finally feel like a real writer now. I'm, finally happy with my work. It's not easy, but it's easy, or at least easier. I'm really enjoying it. I want to, meet these deadlines in 2025. The end of last year, I was thinking this. I want to meet these deadlines in 2025, but I don't want to kill myself over it. I don't want to put so much stress on myself that I feel immobile, which I had done in, previous years when I was publishing and taking bad advice. And so I think it was a bit of an idealistic mindset, which again isn't necessarily bad. However, this year, the biggest thing that I have learned, that I have had to, confront and deal with and learn to accept, is that there is a cost to creative professionalism. And what do I mean by that? There is a cost to being a creative professional. In my mind, that means that you are creating art for the market, for the entertainment industry. You are creating art for commerce, so to speak. A creative professional is not somebody who is, drawing or writing or singing or whatever it happens to be for their own personal use and enjoyment specifically. Not that there is anything wrong with that, because there absolutely is not. But being a creative professional and stepping into entertainment and the market there means that there is a cost. There is not only a financial cost, depending on what you're doing especially, but there's a time cost, and there is a thought cost, and there is a creative cost. And I don't necessarily mean, the idea that, oh, I'm going to have to sign a contract and give everything up and, kill my rights and whatnot, that people tend to think. That's not what I'm talking about. But there is a creative cost, because there is a huge difference between creating something for personal enjoyment and creating something for the market, which I already knew. Publishing previously, I knew this. However, I don't think until this year I really, really understood what that meant. And not understood what that meant in like a numbers sort of way, or, a contract sort of way. But for me as a creative and as somebody who's, working in this industry, I didn't understand what the cost was personally, if that makes sense. Give me a minute, I will try to talk through this a little bit better and more easily. So this year, I think I really had to come to terms with just how difficult it is to be a creative professional and just what that cost means. And that's to say that, I'm writing a book. I finished the working draft of my fantasy novel this year, and I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy that I was actually able to get through it, because it has been such a difficult year. It took me far longer than I really wanted it to, because of different things with family and, as I said, just different medical issues this year, and just personal things. There were quite a few days this year that I literally just couldn't even function. So getting through that, not just for myself, but also continuing to work on the project, was a very big challenge. So I'm very, very proud of myself for getting through that and continuing. And perseverance is definitely one of the other things that I had to learn this year, and that plays into the creative professionalism. But to say all of that, I did learn that there is a definite difference, as I said. For example, if you have watched my previous videos, you know that I am working on a fantasy novel. It's the first in a series, and I actually just finished this draft a few weeks ago, finally. It's taken me most of the year, because there were so many challenges this year, but I worked through and persevered and finally finished this draft, and I'm actually currently on the read-through, and I'm very, very proud of that. But if I was writing this for just myself, I probably would have stopped here. I would have, just written the first draft and maybe put it in a binder and showed it to my friends. I actually used to do that when I was still in grade school, still young, and some of my first novels got passed around in the classroom between me and my friends. Funny story there, actually, somebody who was not one of my friends, my friend was sitting in front of them and actually passed it back because they thought our other friend was sitting behind them, and it wasn't, it was somebody else. So at one point, somebody ended up reading, I think, a chapter or two of my story and going like, what is this? And it was a little bit of a debacle, but it's a funny memory. Anyway, totally not important. Just side note there. But yes, if I was writing this for myself personally and, my family and friends, I would be stopping at, a draft, maybe 2, maybe 3, or a sequel or whatever, just whatever I felt like. But because I am writing it for the market, it is a lot more involved. And again, I knew this from self-publishing previously, but I think my mentality, my understanding of it has changed. My understanding of how much actually goes into a story, into a book, into a film, into a comic, whatever it happens to be, how much goes into all of these projects that, just most of us don't think about. We pick up a book and we go, oh, this is nice. I bet it took them a while to write it, and, now I get to read it in like 2 days. I take longer to read, but A lot of people read fast, and even if they don't, it's just you don't really think about what goes into actually making that. And even as a writer, sometimes you tend to forget like how much time it actually takes to put a book together. Or, you're watching a film, you're not thinking of, how many takes they had to do to get that scene, or how long it took to set the scene up, how long it took for makeup and costuming and all of those things. No matter what it is, you don't really think of the cost behind it when you are enjoying it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Enjoying something and not having to think about all of those things. But if you want to be a creative professional, or if you are a creative professional, it is something you definitely do have to think about, because it's something you have to live. And this year I was definitely encountered by that. Just that, I say a hard truth, and it is a hard truth in some ways, because there is a cost. As I said before, there's a cost in a lot of ways, because when you're making something for the market, there are certain standards that have to be met, versus if you're making it for yourself, just for your friends and family. And those standards are not there. They're not a necessity. They're not something you really have to think about. You're just having fun. You're just being creative, and you don't have to think about all of the other work that would go into creating something for the market. Because if you're going to ask people to pay for something, it better be good. You better have done it right. I personally believe that you should do it right all of the time, of course, but because there are those standards there, they have to be met in order for you to ask someone to spend their hard-earned money on it, or even just their time. Even if it's a free book, or it's a film being shown somewhere, for like a public event, like community event, or whatever it happens to be. You better have gone through the work and done the work and actually put in the time and paid the cost, all of the costs, if you're going to ask this person to spend not only their money, but their time and their, thoughts and their life on this product. And I hate to call it a product, but that's what it is. That's what any of it becomes when it is commercial. And I'm not saying it only becomes a product, because I don't believe that. I believe it can be a product. You can ask money for it. It can be enjoyed, but it can also be art at the same time. I think the two should exist together. It shouldn't just be, a product and not art. Like, it needs to be art too. They need to have at least equal space in order for the market to truly flourish, in order for the culture to flourish. It has to be art, even as it is a product. But that's probably another video right there. Let me know if you would like to hear me rant more about that. But back to the topic at hand. This year, I really learned what it meant to pay the creative cost. The cost to be a creative professional. And honestly, that looked a lot like time. I think for me, the biggest thing was time and thought, the thought cost and the time cost. If you want to do something right, of course, it takes lots of time. And again, I knew this, but this particular project is pretty big, and it just keeps getting bigger. And in a good way. I'm very happy with where it's at. I'm happy with where it's going. I'm very excited about it. Probably a little too excited about it. But it cost a lot of time in order to put all the pieces together and just do my part. Of course, when you publish anything, when it gets made into film, well, whatever it happens to be, there's always going to be other people involved. But you have to do your part. So my part has cost a lot of time. Just this year, even, the related thing that I learned was to persevere. And perseverance is its own cost, honestly. There's a perseverance cost. Because there really is. I had a lot of struggles this year with just even keeping on the novel, keeping going with it, not, tossing it, not coming up with another, draft or starting it again or any of those things. As much as I was in the oh yay, I finally feel like a real writer, and it's not easy, but it's easy. Last year, this year, that just went right out the window. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I did enjoy writing. I enjoyed the project. I am very proud of it. There are some parts that were much more frustrating than others, of course. And I did enjoy it, but there were times where it was definitely like pulling teeth. Actually, pulling teeth was probably way easier. I'm not a dentist, but to any dentists out there, pulling teeth might have been easier. So, I don't envy that job though. But it definitely was. It was difficult. There were times where it was really, really difficult to just even be able to sit down and get a few pages out. Not because I didn't want to, not because I hated writing or anything, like I did in my writing depression. It wasn't, oh, I just don't want to do this anymore. I wanted to do it still, and when I, sit down and get going, I would be more happy with it. And, I could start to write more. And then there were days where I just literally had to tell myself, no, I need to do this. And if I don't love it, I can edit it later, when the draft is done and we're in the revision. But it was a struggle. It was a real struggle to even just get the draft done. Because, like I said, there were days where I just literally couldn't function, or days where I could barely function, and I had to keep going. I think I've been through my struggles in life just like everyone, but I think there's a lot of times where we know that we're struggling, but things end up working out anyways. Thank God everything arranges itself to where it works out. Or, God arranges everything to where it works out. But we don't realize that it could be so much more of a struggle than it is until there are certain points where it is more of a struggle. And you have to push even harder to keep going. You have to fight even harder. And I think that was a lot of this year for me. I had to keep fighting over and over and over and over and over and over and over again with, there was an end in sight, but really not an end in sight. I kept setting, deadlines for myself. Like, I want to finish this draft by this date, and then I want to finish it by this date, and I want to finish it by that date. And the dates kept going by and it still wasn't done. So that can be very disheartening on top of, just the other struggles in general. So I really had to just keep fighting through this whole year. And I think that was part of realizing that I had to, that we have to pay the cost for the creative professionalism. And part of that is perseverance. You can't finish a story or a painting or a song or whatever it happens to be without coming up against some sort of challenge, coming up against some sort of wall eventually, whether it's for every project or not. I personally think most creatives have at least one wall in every project, but even if you don't, it's going to happen eventually. And you're going to have to keep going, regardless, no matter how difficult it gets, because that is part of the job. And, not just part of like, oh, hey, you have a contract and you need to get it done because it's your responsibility, which, absolutely. But also just, for yourself, and just because it's, what you are supposed to be doing, you're going to have to fight through things at one point or the other. And you might have to fight through things, more than once during a project. But when you get to that point, I think, I don't just think. I know now that if you want to continue and you want to, do things correctly and do what you need to be doing, then you don't have the option to say, oh, this is too hard, or, oh, I give up, or, oh, I just, I want to do something else. It is a responsibility, not just, contractually, but it's a responsibility towards yourself and, all the people that are going to be uplifted and inspired by what you do. You don't have the option to say, I can't do it. Of course, there's always extenuating circumstances, but in general, like, you don't have that option. You have to, in order to do this as a job, in order to do what you need to do, you have to pay that cost. The perseverance cost. You have to keep going. You have to fight through it and, get to the other side. You don't have the option of saying, oh, I just can't. If you were doing it just for yourself, you could say, okay, I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't want to do this. You don't have that option. If you're doing it professionally. And again, there's always extenuating circumstances, but in general, you need to keep fighting through and keep persevering. And that can be really, really challenging, especially depending on what's happening, in your life, whether professionally or personally. And that was something I definitely had to learn this year. And it was a real challenge to keep going, because there were so many days where I did not want to keep going. I didn't want to keep going at all. And not because I didn't want the project done. I felt terrible, or, there were things that were going on that were difficult, or it just didn't seem like it was going anywhere. Another deadline passed and I hadn't met it. I had to look past it and go, okay, I still need to do this. This is what I am supposed to be doing. I still need to keep, moving forward despite any of the setbacks. And as I said, that was a really, really hard thing to learn and to swallow. And it sounds simple. It really does. Looking back, it's like, oh, well, of course. But I think knowing that and really accepting it are two very different things. And I think this year I definitely have come to the terms where, it's an acceptance. I have to do my best. I want to do my best anyways. I'm just one of those people that wants to do my best. My mom taught me that, you do your best every time. Like, nobody can expect better of you than your best, is what she always said. Which didn't mean that you can, do an okay job and it's fine. No, you still need to do your best, but it has to be your personal best. Thanks, Mom. But I learned that, this year that, you have to keep going. You have to pay the cost. If you want to be a creative professional, you have to be okay with that. You have to learn to accept it, that there is an above and beyond, and there are standards, and you have to meet them. And sometimes in surprising ways, or just things that you really don't think of. And sometimes I think you start a project and you think it's going to be a lot more simple than it is. This particular project, personally, as I said last video, I've been working on it for over 9 years now. And that was definitely a lot longer than I thought I was going to be working on it. But in order to do it properly, in order to do what I need to do with it, I had to put in the time. I'm still having to put in the time. And I have, new deadlines set for myself. And another thing of accepting the cost is going, okay, I'm going to need to reach those deadlines. I'm not under contract as of yet, but I think, just for practice for one, but also just for myself, and for, the future when I do have a contractual deadline, I need to be able to meet these deadlines. And there's always circumstances, of course, but you don't want to sit out with, oh, there's going to be circumstances, so I can just take my time and, do whatever and it'll work out fine. No. I realized this year that I had been a little too lax in that regard without actually intending to be. As a bit of a perfectionist, I always like meeting deadlines, and, I don't want to push myself so hard that I, get to the breaking point again. Thankfully, I think I've learned what not to do in that regard. But again, you have to pay that cost, and time is definitely part of the cost. Whether it's, okay, I have to give up doing some things, or I have to rearrange my schedule, or whatever it happens to be. I think I've learned that, you have to be pretty regimented to some degree, or at least more than, I kind of thought before. And that's not to say that I wasn't regimented before, but just thinking more of, what can I do to reach my goal? What do I need to give up? What do I need to not do? What can I take away in order to add this thing that I do need to do? And, how do I pay the time cost? So yeah, that I think is the biggest thing I've learned this year. And again, it sounds a little bit like, oh, you should have already known that. But I think thinking about it and, having the thought of, oh yeah, you have to do this, this, and this, and, stay on track and all of those things in your head versus actually understanding what that means and not just what it means to think about it, but what it means to do it in practice. What it means to pay those costs over and over again, what it means to put in the extra time, what it means to put in the extra effort. This story has required a lot of extra effort that again, I'm not knocking my prior works, but there's definitely a lot more effort that has gone into this than there was in, my prior works that I released years ago. And part of it is just learning more about the craft, and becoming a better writer. And part of it is being willing to actually put in the time to make it the best it can be. Again, I'm not expecting perfection, but the best it can be. And that's been definitely something I've gone through this year, and something I will continue to go through as I do the revision, because there's a lot of work to do, and I'm excited about it, but it's also going to take some time. So that's been my biggest thing for this year, and I think that's played out in a lot of ways, not just finishing the draft, but the perseverance, talking about that. The end of this year has been crazy. I definitely had to work through the perseverance. A few months ago in October, I was scheduled to go to a writing conference, and I hadn't been to one in a while, so that was very exciting. And I was really looking forward to it, and we had kind of been back and forth over like, can I really, swing this conference right now with everything else going on? But finally was like, okay, yes, I'm going. My friend was coming with me. It was just, super exciting. And then the day before the conference, literally the day before we were supposed to leave, I had an injury, and I am currently using a wheelchair right now, and I had never used a wheelchair before. And it was a foot injury. It's still a foot injury. High foot. It's still there. But yeah, the day before we were supposed to leave, I had this injury, major injury. My foot swelled up like huge, there's just so much going on. And I was just kind of knocked down, quite literally and figuratively. I sat there, or I actually laid in bed that night when it happened, and I was in a lot of pain. Even, taking things, just in a lot of pain. And I sat there and I'm praying, and I'm going, I was so positive I was supposed to go to this conference. Like, everything, it finally worked out. We were able to, put in the reservation, it was paid for, the whole thing. My friend was able to come, which, in years past, she wouldn't have been able to. And so, like, it was a big deal. And I was just, staring at the ceiling, just like crying my eyes out. And I'm not a crier. I'm just not. That's, not something, not that there's anything wrong with crying, but it's just not something I typically do. But, I was crying like crazy. It's everywhere. Ugly crying. Very ugly crying. And I was sitting there and just, or laying there rather, and just staring at the ceiling and God, what am I supposed to be doing? Like, what do I do with this? It was not what I was expecting at all. It was completely left field. Just last minute, literally last minute, something I'd never experienced before, injury I'd never had, never used a wheelchair before. I had family members who had to use them for a period of time, and varying recoveries after surgeries, but I had never used one. And it just, a lot of pain, and I just wasn't sure what was going on. I didn't know if the conference was going to be able to, accommodate me, if they were going to have, a room I could use, or, what the building was like. I mean, of course, everything has to be accessible to a certain degree, but some places are more accessible than others. And for someone who had never had to deal with that, I was like, I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. And I was flabbergasted because I had been, so looking forward to it and was like, yeah, I need to go to this and this is, great and everything. So I laid there and I cried about it and I prayed about it. And the next day I just was like, okay, we'll see what happens. We'll see how this works out. I need an answer. Do I need to go to this or not? And speaking of things, working out, again, just, sometimes things work out to where we don't realize that they could have been worse. And then other times we have to persevere through them and they don't work out as we think they will. Well, the following day, the conference called us and there was a room all of a sudden because oh wait, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The following day, when I was supposed to leave, I had emailed the people at the conference, and they were the people running the conference that were actually giving out rooms too. That was the joint job for this conference. So I had emailed them and said, hey, this is what's going on, and they were very apologetic, of course, and I told them, all right, this is I need this kind of room, and I asked about the grounds and all of that, and so they were able to get me a room. And my mom actually drove me over to the conference. Thank God for Mom. And we got there later because it was, a bit of a drive and everything. And we got to the room. And the room was not accessible. I could barely, get my wheelchair through half of it. And again, I'm not used to using, well, I wasn't used to using a wheelchair. I've gotten more used to it now, but I wasn't used to it. And I was just like, what are we going to do? We called up the people, and at this point, it's pretty late. We were on the phone with them for a while, and there wasn't an accessible room. And I was like, well, I don't know what to do. You couldn't get a refund for the conference at this point. And so, yeah, we were on the phone at midnight. Midnight, just kind of sitting in the car, like, I don't know what's going on. We'll see what happens, And so the people at the conference were like, well, can we call you back tomorrow, see if we can find something? It's late now. Everybody's been checked in. There's really nothing else we can do at this point. So we were like, okay. So we had to drive all the way back home. And again, my foot is huge. I'm just, in pain. I don't know what's going on. So I was like, okay. I sat there, I was praying again. I'm like, all right, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I don't know. And then the following day, they found us a room. Last minute, somebody had actually left. There was like an intensive before the official conference started that I was supposed to go to. But I unfortunately didn't make it. But somebody had left. They had just been there for that. And it was an actual accessible room. The funny thing was, the night before when we had been there, one of the guards on the premises was trying to help us, well, maybe this room is open or, whatever. And it was an accessible room that he was, looking at on his, tablet on his side, trying to see if maybe, the people had missed something. And it was taken, but it was, right towards the front. And he's like, well, this one's accessible, but it's, not available, unfortunately. He thought it was and then found out it wasn't. And so the next day when they called us and said, hey, somebody left, guess which room they had been in, which accessible room they had been in, the same exact one that the guard had, pointed out to us. So I was like, all right, Mom, I'm pretty sure this is a, hey, you need to go. And she's like, yeah, I feel the same way. So I was like, okay, are you up to it? And she's like, yeah. And I went back and forth. I won't lie. I went back and forth because it worked out, but it was still a challenge. I was still in a lot of pain. I still didn't know, how to, or I wasn't familiar with getting around in a wheelchair. I wasn't sure, which classes I would be able to get to, what it would be like to get back and forth, get around, the whole thing. And I have some different sensory issues that I deal with. So I was also unsure, what the room would be like. But I was like, okay, I prayed about it and I thought about it and I was like, all right, I think I need to go, even despite the challenges. And we got there and we had a great time. I had a great time. But honestly, it was a challenge. It was a super challenge. Not only did my mom have to wheel me around everywhere, or at least, mostly everywhere, because I don't think I could have gotten back and forth fast enough between all of the people without her, for sure. And she had to wheel me, to and from the room because it was a bit, rocky terrain in some places. And of course, there were sidewalks and everything, but, just they weren't perfect sidewalks. We'll put it that way. And, just getting back and forth from the cafeteria to the place where the conference was, or the classes were being held. I really couldn't have done it without her. And I had a good time, and I met some really great people, but it was a challenge. It was a continual challenge. And I think I learned from there that I can actually do more than I thought I could. I'm capable of more than I thought. And not just because, I can't currently get around like I normally do, but I think because we sometimes have things happen and they're not as bad as they could be, or they're not as much of a challenge as they could be, that we don't realize what we're actually capable of until you're stretched to your breaking point in maybe new ways. You don't actually realize what you're capable of or how much you can persevere until you absolutely need to, or until you're challenged to. And I was able to carry that over into my work too, because there's different things that I've, been wanting to do or research or learn about or pursue with this project. And I had them in the back of my mind. And I had taken, different classes and things. Film was one of them. I had taken, screenwriting courses and whatnot years ago. And I had always intended to incorporate it into the project, but encountering all these challenges and really thinking about what I need to do for this project and, paying the standard cost, I guess you could say, the creative cost, the full mile of what do I need to do with this, made me realize, hey, you need to work on this aspect as well. You need to work more in this direction. You're capable of more. This project is capable of more. There's more that needs to be done. There's more that needs to be pursued. And I don't think I really would have thought of it that way, or thought of it as, this is all possible. This is all something that can be done and should be done, if I hadn't really been challenged in these different ways this year, particularly the end of this year. I don't think I would have thought of, myself as being able to see this project through in the way that it needs to be seen through. And just seeing myself as someone who's, capable of doing all these different things, or, working with different people to do all these different things. I think we put boundaries between ourselves and what is possible, creatively or financially, or, as far as work goes, without really realizing it. So it was all things I wanted to do and hoped for the future, but I wasn't really putting super amount of effort towards them because I think I still felt like it wasn't accessible. And going through these different challenges and learning that, hey, I'm capable of more than I thought I was, and, just being confronted with different people too, in different industries, really made me go, okay, this is the direction that, you're pulling me in. This is the direction that this story needs to take, or, the series needs to take. I'm going to pursue it because not only is it the thing that I need to do, but it's also something that I'm capable of. God didn't just give me this story idea so I could just, do the base minimum thing and then, feel like, oh, I'm not, capable of doing the things over here, branching out. Like, I not only wanted to, but felt like I needed to. So that's been a weird blessing in disguise. All of these challenges have been a weird blessing in disguise, because I've definitely learned that, okay, not only is it something that needs to happen, but it's something I'm capable of. And if it is something that I need to do, then not only will the right things appear at the right time, but it's something that I need to work towards. If you have a talent that you've been given, you need to use it. And a lot of the time that means putting in time and paying that creative cost, not just to learn more about how to do things, but to branch out, or to pursue different avenues, or to pursue the best version of whatever you're working on. So definite blessing in disguise, and I was very grateful for that this year, even though there were a lot of challenges. And I was grateful for the conference for sure, even though I had my foot elevated the whole time and had to sit in the back of class, and it was still very swollen and all of these other things. But I'm also grateful for, honestly, a different perspective, because since I'm using a wheelchair right now, I think I've learned a little better what people who use them regularly go through, and some of the challenges. And I have super respect for all of you. You guys make it look easy, and it's definitely challenging in ways that I wouldn't have thought. So yes, huge respect. But also now I know some ways in which I can hopefully be more accommodating for people, with different disabilities. If I run into someone, or see someone struggling, or whatever, because I've actually been able to experience that myself. Hello from the past as well as the future. Actually, reverse that. Hello from the future as well as the past at this point. I actually forgot to film this section the other day, so I'm adding it in. But I did want to mention that this year, 2025, was when I finally started my YouTube channel. And if you have watched my channel introduction video, you'll know that I was thinking about starting a channel for a while, and I just hadn't really decided what I wanted to do with it. And to be honest, I was a little bit nervous. I think everyone's nervous when they first start anything, of course. But this year I finally was like, okay, we're going to do this. This is the right time. And I got the materials together, and I, learned as much as I could about putting together a channel well, and, what to do, what not to do, that kind of thing. Of course, you always learn the more you go along. But that was another example of how I could actually do more than I thought I could. And that I could, pursue something that was a dream and was a, thing I wanted to do, but also seemed kind of unattainable, even though it was attainable. And so here we are. And I was also able to pull different things that I had learned in the past into making this channel, which, if you watched the first episode of Creator's Cut, I talked a little bit about that there, just using different talents and different things that I had learned over time, and how they all kind of came together, and how fun and exciting that was, and how we kind of all have that in our lives. All of the things that we go through just come together at different times to help us along. So on that note, I just want to encourage you to start pursuing the things that you've put on the back burner. If you have a talent that you haven't been using or sharpening, then begin to do so. And don't be angry with yourself for not having done it before now. We all have things that happen. We all have reasons why we just can't get to something, or it seems like it's just not time, or we're frustrated, or whatever it is. But you can't be angry with yourself for not having used something before now, for not having sharpened your talent up until this point, for however long it's been. We don't have time to be angry. There's so much to do, and so many good things that we can be pursuing, and anger's not one of them. So I'm just going to encourage you to take 2026 and beyond, of course, to start pursuing the things that you've maybe let slip away. And I know there's things that I've let slip away to the side that I'm also actively pursuing, or wanting to actively pursue and sharpen now. So even if it's 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, an hour a day, buy yourself new materials if you need it, and don't be cheap. I'm not saying spend millions of dollars, obviously, but you and your talent are worth a little bit of money. So, you know, buy the nice pencil, buy the nice pen, whatever, you know, paper, whatever it happens to be. Get something that is not, you know, cheap, because if you work with cheap materials, you're going to feel cheap. My mom taught me that too. But just continue to learn about whatever you're pursuing as well. Well, we always need to be learning and sharpening ourselves too. And there's so many ways to do that. So even if you need to start small, often starting small is a good thing, because then you can work your way up to something bigger without getting overwhelmed. But start. Take this next year to start. And again, leave your frustration with yourself and your anger with yourself in the past, and just keep moving forward. I can't wait to see what you create. So those are some of the things I learned in 2025, and I am definitely looking forward to 2026 and continuing work on this project and moving forward with it. So right now I'm just going to read off those 4 questions that I got from the Writer's Digest magazine. I believe it was December 2024, maybe January 2024. And these can be adapted for anything, but I thought they were some great questions, and I really enjoyed answering them both last year and this year. So if you would like to use them, here you go. The first one is, what was your biggest writing accomplishment of 2024? How does it make you feel to think about it? My handy dandy notebook right here. The second question is, what was the biggest challenge you came up against in 2024? And of course, you can substitute the year here. What did you learn from it? The third question is, how do you feel about your writing heading into 2025, or in this case, 2026? What are you most excited about? What makes you apprehensive? And for the last question, what's one way you can set yourself up for success this coming year? So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful new year, and I will see you in 2026 with continuing videos about my continuing creative journey. Thank you all.